I'm guilty of a lot of things in my early days within the sport of football. And I think one that I was definitely guilty of, and a lot of people the same was football is a team sport. Every player is unique, and we didn't truly individualize.
Using the Q chronic, for example, to predict injuries, well, that's the way we should be going. It doesn't work like that.
And maybe be a little bit controversial, but to start with a statement in relation to the GPS tracking technologies. They're not perfect.
And we're measuring things which are pretty easy to measure. So you put a GPS on a player and you know that that player's run 500 meters during a sprint during the game. But we have no idea what the demand from a cognitive point of view in terms of decision making is. How can it improve our daily work, gain time? So for example, we have a research department and we use AI to summarize research papers.
Welcome to FSI Talk, where the best experts in the world come together to talk about football. Today we have a talk about inside football sciences. My name is Fabio Nakamura. I'm an associate professor at the University of Maia, and I'm also working as the head of strength and conditioning at Football Club of Porto. Today we have two experts to talk with us about this topic. It will be Chris Barnes and Chris Carlin. So I think you can introduce yourselves, it's easier, then we can proceed for the first question.
So I'm Chris Carlin. So I'm currently head of performance for the French Football Federation. I have a degree in sports sciences, PhD as well. And I've worked for various elite sporting institutions over the last 25 years.
And I'm Chris Barnes. I'm a consultant sports scientist, have been for the past 15 years. Most of my work has been in the sport of football, although I have spent time working in rugby, in basketball, and in horse racing. Of late, a lot of my time is now spent supporting coaches and supporting practitioners to hopefully improve their work and hopefully help develop the whole field of sports science.
That's great. So we have two big experts in this field. And the first question is about the evolution of the role of the fitness coach. We know that they are becoming more and more involved with sports science. And how do you see this evolution between fitness coaching and sports science? And what are the skills and knowledge that they must possess to be in this role?
Well, I think from my point of view, so I came into football 30 years ago now. And I have to say, when I came in, I was a bit green about football science. So at the time I was employed in an English university. And the first thing I did in the club I went into was I effectively tried to replicate what we had in the university. So I built a laboratory with breath-by-breath respiratory gas analysis. We had a reflectron for bloods, a bod pod for assessment of body composition. And it was all very clinical and all very scientific, I guess. So we did embrace sports science from the outset. In my view, what we've seen happen though over the years is that most definitely the role of the fitness coach has demanded the skills of a sports scientist. It has demanded that people are objective. It has demanded that they understand the limitations of an awful lot of the methodologies and the techniques that they do employ. And increasingly, in the last 5 years, probably 10 years, they're required to have a real superset of data skills. So data management, data analysis, and data visualization. Chris?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the skills of today's S&C coaches have changed. I think, to be honest, the vast majority now do have a sports science background, which is, giving them the skill sets to deal with contemporary sports science, the requirements of working in a professional football club where you're dealing with data, dealing with objective measures. And I think what's also important to mention as well is, moving away from sports science, is that a lot of fitness coaches now as well are coaches as well. So they'll have for example, in Europe, a UEFA A license, a UEFA B. And I think that a lot of the coaches, together with the sports science knowledge, their skills in S&C and their skills also as a coach, I just think with the whole job profile, the profile of a fitness coach now has completely evolved. Completely evolved. It has.
Okay. And about the load management and fatigue, because we know that there are several tracking systems in the clubs. The professionals are becoming more and more aware of the importance of using these tracking systems, and we can use it to quantify external load, but also we can make some inferences about fatigue and about injury management. How do you see the use of these tracking systems in these two applications?
So we've been on an interesting journey in the world of football science, I would say, and I'm guilty of a lot of things in my early days within the sport of football. And I think one that I was definitely guilty of, and a lot of people the same were, was football is a team sport, and we would deal with a team en masse. So we didn't acknowledge or respect the fact that every player is different. Every player is unique, and we didn't truly individualize not just our interventions with them, but also the way in which we attempted to load manage them. Wind the clock forward to today, and I think in wherever you were to go in Europe, if you're to go into the top level clubs, you'll find practitioners who know their players intimately and are capable of actually managing those players, partly because of these technologies that you talk about, but I think partly just because of the skill set, the human skill set, the practitioners developed over the years.
Yeah, some good good points, Chris. Not much else to add on my side. I think in addition to the external load, we need still to look at the internal side of things. Traditionally, sports science 20 years ago, 25 years ago, only used heart rate measures, and we know that the internal load is often not correlated to the external. So I think it's very, very, very important that we have both, if possible. Okay, it might double the workload to analyze, interpret the data, but extremely important. It's extremely important, and I think that will give a better overall picture of the demands which are placed upon the player. So the external demands is what we will probably impose on the player, and the internal will give the players responses to those internal demands. And I think that's one area which we've forgotten over the last 10 years, where we're just using GPS. Okay, so the latest GPSs provide both sets of data, internal and external, but I just think it's something which we've forgotten about, and we need those measures because it's all about the athlete. It's knowing your athlete, and we can all do 300 meters sprinting in a session, but what's the actual response to that from a physiological point of view?
I think just to add to that, Chris, so today in this workshop, we've had 3, possibly 4 presentations which have specifically focused on, some new and novel methods for looking at internal load. And this is the first time in a lot of years that I've seen such a focus on this. I totally agree with you on that important area of our
Yeah.
work.
Well, it's in marrying the data which we have on the loading with obviously the wellness measures. I mean, it gives you a holistic, profile of your player. Time consuming maybe, you need resources to do that. You need the skill sets to interpret the data. You need multiple measures as well to create a benchmark as well to compare against, for the same player, for example. It's impossible to, just using an average for the whole group to decide on what needs to be done, who needs to be, you've really got to do it from an individual point of view. So yeah.
And what is the relationship between these training loads that we quantify using the GPS and the injury occurrence, in your opinion?
Well, let's avoid talking about prediction.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
first thing.
Oh.
At the end of the day, there's so many factors that will influence the potential for a football player to injure themselves. You can't just base, which we've seen in the past in various publications over the last 10 years, where certain researchers have published a paper saying, okay, using the acute chronic, for example, to predict injuries, well, that's the way we should be going. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. It's multifactorial. It's one element which can help, and it can help you control the loads, avoid the spikes in load from one day to the next, from 1 week to the next. But it's part of an overall package, if you like, to help reduce the chances of injury. And I just think we've got to be very, 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 very cautious about the terminology we use.
I think the reality is, it goes back to something that we mentioned earlier. The relationship between load management, and injury risk is highly individual. So, you could have two players of the same age, play the same position, similar anthropometric characteristics, who display similar external load properties, possibly the similar internal load responses. But in certain scenarios, the risk of injury could be totally different for one to the other. And that could be down to a multitude of factors. So taking the load management thing into the realms of injury risk it's important. And we're all involved in that game, but we are nowhere near cracking that nut. We've got so far to go before I think we can truly deal with this with confidence. There is another factor involved in this as well, because we're sat here talking like it's us that actually controls everything that goes on in the lives of these players. And of course, that's not the case. Most of the time when the players are on the field, they're under the control of the coaching staff. And coaches are good. Don't get away from that. All of the coaches that I've worked with are good, but they're all different as well. And you may get coaches whose preference is for an awful lot of work in small areas, which is technically and cognitively demanding. But the physical demands of that kind of work are very different to those coaches who like to coach the big picture on a big pitch with 8, 9, 10, 11 players. And so factors outside of our control also come into play here. So this whole question is hugely, hugely complex. And as I say, I think it's something that we'll be working on for a long time to come to try and get closer to that holy grail of being in control, if you like, of this risk of injury.
Totally.
I think, one area which there's so much to be done is the cognitive loading of players and how to actually evaluate it on a football pitch. Currently, with the tools and technologies we have, we can't do it. It's just not feasible. But I personally think that the day we can objectively measure the cognitive load and the fatigue, the mental fatigue of players, and the part that potentially might play in determining the potential risk of injuring oneself, I think that would be massive, 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 massive. And we can't currently do that. We can have questionnaires on cognitive fatigue, but to actually measure it objectively, it's a game changer. That will be the game changer for me.
Yeah. I agree. Actually, I worked with Samuel Marquara for many years, and he's the one who is proposing the mental fatigue as the factor that can trigger some responses from the players. So what's your opinion about mental fatigue?
We're in a situation at the moment where the focus is very much on the highest level of football when it comes to the media and it comes to a lot of, I guess, the interactions that people like ourselves have. We know that the demands of the game of football are increasing. That's proven. We know that in certain circumstances, the number of games in a season that players need to play are increasing. And then, okay, if you've got players that represent the country, international duty, very often in the period of time when their colleagues are on downtime or rest time, they'll be with international teams and still training hard. Cognitive fatigue is very, very real in my mind. And this is where, going on Chris's point, Chris's question there, the sooner we find objective methods of assessing cognitive fatigue, because again, it will be different for different players in different circumstances, it will take us that one step closer to actually mitigating a little bit more of the risk of physical injury in the people we work with.
Yeah. I think as well, you've got to differentiate between mental fatigue and cognitive fatigue. I mean, your mental fatigue, there's the emotional side, which we don't take into account. Peer pressure, pressure from your family, pressure from the media, pressure from the manager, pressure from the agent. How and how does that impact the player? And we don't take, we try, but as Chris says, we don't have control of the player. We don't know what's happening outside of football. And again, for me, that's an area where I don't know if we'll ever get the answers or have any answers to the question, but it's something which, we need to, to be taken into account. So, yeah.
We're not really very good.
No, you are.
No, all we're doing is telling you everything that we don't know.
Well, we've taken the easy way out.
Based on
In actual fact, we've taken the easy way out, and we're measuring things which are pretty easy to measure. So you put a GPS on a player, and you know that player's run 500 meters during a sprint during the game, for example. Okay, but we have no idea what the demands from a cognitive point of view in terms of decision making, information processing, what strain that has had on the player. And until we have that information, and the day somebody cracks that nut, as you says, they're a millionaire. They're a millionaire.
Yeah, we know that coaches are very often very instinct driven. So they provide the training drills, they organize the training sessions, but they don't have an accurate idea about loading or even the GPS data. It comes after the training session. They are not using in real time. So what's your ideas about the interaction between sports scientists and coaches in terms of reducing the instinct and enhancing the application of the science?
But I'll give my humble opinion. I think that some sports scientists seriously underestimate the ability of a coach to determine or have an idea in his head, and a good idea, of what's happened from a loading point of view. They know their players. A new coach coming in, they won't know the players as well as a coach who's been there for a season or 2 seasons. But I think we should stop thinking that the coaches don't know anything about loading. They use their instinct, their intuition as well. And that's an area we're trying to explore a little bit of it at the Football Federation, is the intuition. So determine, can we quantify intuition of the coach? Is it the right moment to take that player out? I don't have access to any data. We're watching the training session and I feel there's something wrong. GPS data might not show that up, but the coach knows, and he doesn't follow his instinct, the player gets injured. I remember a famous manager once saying, I can look at my players and I know if there's a chance that they might get injured just by looking at them. And I wouldn't disagree with him. So yeah. And for me, afterwards I'll let Chris speak. For me, the GPS data, the heart rate data, whatever, it's complementary, and it's the coach's instinct. It's the most important. We're there as a backup, We're there to back the coach up, to help support with some objective information, but it's the coach's instinct, the coach's intuition, which is the most important thing.
I think as well, there's a couple of things with your modern coach. So most of your modern coaches now will have actually been players at a time when there were sports scientists at their club. So they'll have experienced sports science as a player. So a lot of them will have a lot more faith and a lot more trust in the individuals who are working in that position when they become a coach. The other thing that has happened is, sports science in football has been around for 30 years. It's an accepted part, or a sports scientist is an accepted part of a backroom team. And in most clubs now, they have a seat at the table when training is planned, when training is reviewed, and very often you'll see them on the training field stood next to the coach discussing what's being seen. So the environment, the micro-environment that these people inhabit, for the fitness coach or sports scientist is a lot more inclusive today than it probably ever was 25 years ago.
Yeah. And you have some coaches as well who are going, who have a sports science degree. Or, and don't forget that when you do your coaching badges, there is a sports science element in there anyway. It's not just technical, tactical. So when you do your coaches come for our pro license, there's various modules which are quite sports sciencey, if you like. So they do get the knowledge. And as Chris said, you have this generation now, which, 40 years ago, it wasn't the same, but this generation, they've come through the very, very start of sports science, and they've probably had I would say maybe an advantage as well, is they probably saw the mistakes we made all those years ago, and maybe didn't say anything or whatever, but now they know what to expect. They know probably the ins and outs of it just as well as we do at times. They've been a player and now they're a coach, and they know what they want. I mean, I've worked with managers who knew what they wanted. It's I work with a manager who had a sports science degree and a strong S&C background as well. And
But though, Chris, we know, we were talking earlier about the tracking technologies that an awful lot of football clubs use now. These give us real insight into the demands of the drills that coaches like to run. There is no excuse on most occasions, really, for their drills and training sessions to be designed with a full confidence of the kind of responses that you're going to get from the players. And in fact, the amount of input from the fitness coach or the sports scientist could be minimal or zero. Because what's the point in having these technologies if they don't let you proactively use them and the information they provide to plan sessions that will achieve not just the technical and tactical goals, but the physical goals for your players?
And what about the new technologies? Because we have been stressing the tracking systems. Okay, maybe 10 years ago it was a new technology, but now everyone is used to use the tracking system, the GPSs and video-based tracking and so on. And what kind of technologies you oversee in the next few years?
Can I just maybe be a little bit controversial, but just start with a statement in relation to the GPS tracking technologies, because they're not perfect. Anything that's communicating with a satellite that's however many thousands of miles in the sky and is trying to report movements down to 10 centimeters or less is not going to be particularly accurate. And it falls on the sports scientists, when they're using any kind of equipment like that generates data, to do their due diligence and actually quantify in their environment the level of confidence they can have in the information they collect. So the reliability in controlled and less controlled conditions. So then when they're getting information back and they see something that looks unusual, if you understand the noise that's inherent in the technology itself, you can make a reasoned judgment call as to whether this unusual thing is actually just within the normal variance that you would expect, or whether it sits outside, and that's when you should act. So you're absolutely right. We have all sorts of newer technologies, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done to really work as a scientist with the technologies that we currently have.
Yeah, I think as well is, the current technologies, we need to miniaturize them as well. So currently the GPS is, this size, light, but it needs to be miniaturized. I was lucky enough a few years ago to work on a project for a French League One club, where they asked me to do a market survey of all the various technologies on the market. And I found 8 years ago some wacky technologies. So bandages, plasters, band-aids with capturing physiological measurements. I even saw a nanotechnology pill, which was under development, where you swallowed it and it circulated in your bloodstream and gave you respiratory, lactate, everything. So I think the way things are going, everything's going to be miniaturized, which, is great. But the most important thing, as Chris says, is, okay, miniaturize it, great, but is the data provided by that technology, is it reliable? Is it valid? Is it accurate? And can you use it day in and day out for a player? If it's minus 10 degrees, it's 30 degrees C. And I still think we've got a lot of way to go. And why spend money trying to develop new technologies when the current technology we use is pretty good, not perfect, pretty good, but make it as accurate as it should be. And I think that's something we need to improve on. And also as well, I've found over the years, and it's got better, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the software provided with a GPS, for example, difficult to use, not easy to export your data, not easy to create your dashboards. So it's not just the technology, it's the way you're actually dealing with your data, having access to the raw data set to inspect it and remove any outliers in the raw data. We don't always have access to that. So I still think, it's end user software as well, and the communication between this GPS software and your AMS as well, it's not always fluid as well. So you got your data, you want to put it onto your AMS, marry that data with other data, and you can't always do it because the API is not working, or there's data lost along the way. So there's still quite a bit to be done.
But these are just the challenges that we face. And let's be honest, it's the job of ourselves and the sports scientists to face the challenges head on and try and find solutions that will help drive our understanding of football science forward.
Yeah, it's true. And I agree with the opinion that it's impossible, or it's very difficult at least to predict injuries using any kind of loading measurements, or with the current technologies we have, it's almost impossible to predict. But with the implementation of AI and machine learning, what do you expect for the next years? I'm not saying anything about prediction, but can we start thinking that it will be possible to at least classify or cluster the players into high risk groups or lower risk groups? What's your opinion on that?
I think we do that already.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. The advent of AI it's a new dawn for all of us, and it's frightening when you're as old as I am, when you've got these things happening. But totally agree with you that it offers us the capacity to be more confident in the conversations and the inferences that we make when we're talking to coaches and we're saying, look, we do believe that we're in a situation where we need to act. Can we look at training today and maybe make a few modifications just to help protect the players a little bit? And go back to your previous question, or the one before, the coaches are open to those things because they have this stronger relationship with the sports scientists, and they themselves have, don't underestimate how deep their understanding of these issues and these factors actually is. So we are in a good place. We're moving forward. And AI will definitely be a tool that will help us move forward that bit quicker. But I don't think we'll be predicting injuries accurately in my lifetime.
I think one area which I think is particularly interesting in relation to AI and machine learning is the capacity to improve workflows. Dealing with large amounts of data, noisy data, getting the AI to structure your data, improve your workflow, and perhaps identifying clusters, as we said, a cluster of players, and saying potentially this is a profile of within our squad, 4 or 5 players who potentially have that profile. Not to say yes, they will injure themselves, but to save time to the sports scientist or the doctor in actually like dealing with the information, analysing it. AI for me, that's the future. The work we've done as well is, and it's away from sports science, is within the federation, for example, is look at AI or in our research processes, is how can it improve our daily work, gain time. So, for example, we have a research department, and we use AI to summarize research papers.
Yeah.
So we don't need to read the whole paper, and you put it into the AI system, and it'll 3 lines, and it'll give you the main points. So it's about saving time. And I think within football, it's Chris and myself, we've worked in football for a long time, is you're always lacking time. And we're getting more and more data to deal with, and multiple sources of data. And AI for me will bring that together and allow it and provide you with opportunities and information that allows you to gain time. And for me, that's the big game. Forget the prediction. For me, forget the prediction. Don't try, but it can help you to analyze, collate, and present your data in a much more efficient way.
Okay. It's last question. But we are a new reality in the clubs. I mean, sports scientists working within the organizations. We are working with the coaching staffs. We are in direct contact with the players. But we have to admit that we are a new reality in the clubs as sports scientists. So, what's the message we can give or we can provide to the players, to the coaches, when they are a bit afraid of sports science? So, what's the message we can provide to them?
Look, what we're all striving for is to have a situation where there is a level of mutual trust and confidence. That isn't going to happen overnight, and it isn't going to happen by any specific action on our part. It'll only happen by demonstrating repeatedly to the players and the coaches the value of the information that we're collecting. And over time, they will obviously, hopefully come to us because they understand that what we're trying to do is in the best interests of themselves and obviously of the club that they're playing for.
I think, to be honest, as Chris said before, I think it's especially in the Premier League in the UK, sports science is generally widely accepted now anyway, and certain coaches have got a sports science degree. The support staff, 99% of the time, I would say, have a sports science related degree as well. So I think it's becoming more and more accepted. Certain countries were a little bit behind. There's a certain amount of, I don't understand sports science. I don't understand what it can bring. And sometimes the sports scientists themselves might convey the wrong message, and the coach might see them as a threat because, the sports scientist is, I know this, and I think you don't know that the same thing as I do. And I think that it's going to improve in all the countries eventually. But one thing I do think we do probably need to do a little bit of work on, irrespective of the country and how far advanced they are in terms of sports science support, is the soft skills of sports scientists. So we've all got the hard skills, Anybody leaving university with a sports science degree, they've got the pretty hard skills, skills which we probably didn't have at the time as well. Like a sports scientist now, Leeds University, they can program, they can use R, Python, etc. But they don't always have the soft skills, the ability to communicate, for example. And I think that's one area we need to perhaps develop within our sports science programs, and I think that will help as well the integration of the scientists within a club environment, especially in a club environment, over the next few years.
One thing that is happening though, Chris, there's soft skills and soft skills. What I'm seeing, maybe it's in England more than elsewhere, but correct me if I'm wrong, but you're getting a lot of your people who are working as sports scientists are going through their coaching qualifications as well. So they're getting a better understanding of the game of football from through the coach's eye, and they're getting a better understanding of the thinking of the coach, so they can align their own thinking much more comfortably with that. And I think that is a real positive move that's taken place.
Yeah. Okay, it was a pleasure and an honor to be with you, to be references in our field. I wish to thank you again to FSI, and see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.